You and I debated at least a few of the same people. I've debated Jordan Peterson several times. You did that at least once. I think you've also spoken to Ben Shapiro. I'm not sure how we've overlapped with other people, but I think you've spoken to people who I would avoid. I'm wondering how you make these decisions. I saw that you spoke to Nick Fuentes, who's, I think, an avowed white supremacist, if not actual Nazi. Recently, you spoke to Candace Owens. Is there anyone you regret engaging?
I'll take that in two parts. So for the first one of my strengths is that I'm willing to talk to almost anybody. So it gives me very big reach into a lot of different types of communities because I'm willing to go into different shows and I can have a good time with a large variety of people and different types of characters, but I can still provide pushback against a large variety of different types of characters. So it's kind of a balancing act of how aggressive do I want to be versus how long do I want my legs to be? How far do I want my reach, I guess, to extend into other communities? The only times I'm disappointed or I regret engaging with people is if I feel like the other person got more out of it than I feel like I did. So for instance, if I were to platform a very small, very radical person and then not give adequate pushback, and I feel like he bested me in a conversation that I could have been more prepared for, or if I'm, I don't want to promote bad ideas and bring them to everybody's attention and then, have a bad showing against it. But if there's really popular talking points and a lot of people believe a thing, I think it's worth discussing and I'll have those people on to fight with them. Yeah. And then the second part was if I regret, over the past year, I've regretted everything. God.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. It's a constant balancing act between, like I said, how gentle do I want to be versus how aggressive do I want to be. I would say around the last year, I'd been making I go back and forth between these very empathetic approaches to debate versus these very aggressive approaches. And so the past year, I've been more empathetic and I've gotten conversations with Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens. And I worry sometimes that I play this role in oh, well, look, I debated Destiny and we got along and it was fine. And it's well, we kind of debated, but I was being very, very, very gentle because I'm trying not to make you so mad that you'll never talk to me again or that you won't have the conversation. So then when I look back at the role I played in that, and then I see now when I take more aggressive positions on things that I feel strongly about, they're well, I can't talk to Destiny. That guy's crazy. Candace Owens wouldn't let me in her space a week ago because she said I was a sexual deviant while she was speaking with Andrew Tate and Dan Bilzerian. I'm what? So now I'm
you're in good company, or you're worse than that good company.
Yeah.
I mean, I watched part of your conversation with Candace, and now perhaps she has transformed into her current monstrous shape since you debated her. I haven't really followed her timeline very closely. This is one of the consequences of having gotten off social media. There are things I don't follow, which they seem very big online, I'm sure. But Candace Owens becoming a proper anti-Semite was something I think I had on my bingo card some years ago, and so I was unsurprised. But I'm not quite sure when she fully pulled the mask off, if it was ever properly on. You don't think the semi-friendly, even somewhat adversarial conversation with her just has the net effect of kind of laundering her reputation with your audience and doing more harm than good?
With my audience, absolutely not. With the other audiences, that's what is so hard to determine. Like I said, I don't like the idea that Candace can say oh, well, I had a debate with Destiny or I had a conversation with Steven. And it's not really. That was a very gentle. You watch the conversation, I think at around 10 minutes, I realized that even then I'm pushing back too much and she's about to rage out and leave. And I'm okay, well, we got to be more gentle. So that irritates me. My audience is never becoming, just because I put out so much content, I stream so much, I put out so many videos and I have so many conversations. They're not going to hear somebody like that and instantly be captivated and become whatever neo-Nazi Blexit combo of weird stuff she is now. But for audiences in the middle, I don't know. It's hard to say. It's good to provide some pushback. It legitimizes me in that I can talk to a lot of different people. It legitimizes me in the eyes of her audience. Oh, well, this, Steven's a reasonable guy that you can have conversations with. But then it also plays kind of a dirty role that everybody's been complicit in over the past several years of making some of these ideas seem a lot more reasonable and sane than they actually are. And I've spent the past few months or the past month or so after the assassination attempt, saying, okay, hold on, no, let's back up. A lot of this stuff is insane, and I think we need to go back to calling this insane.
Is there anyone whose name I would recognize who you've decided not to talk to because you just viewed them as too dishonest or unethical?
I'll still talk to anybody, but the conversations are just going to be a lot more aggressive. I'm not going to have a conversation with Jordan Peterson while he just kind of like meanders through the point that 20% excess deaths in Europe are all caused by the vaccine. That's not going to happen next time. Like, okay, well, we're going to sit here, we're going to fixate on this point now. Or when I ask Ben Shapiro, like, don't you guys think you grade Trump on a curve? And he's like, yeah, we do. I'm like, okay, that can't stand, right? Yeah, I just won't let those things flow by anymore. Yeah.
So what have you regretted in the last year? What has been the controversy or the chaos?
For some reason, I never understood that, the media is, I always hear the media is left-wing dominated. The media is dominated by the left. And I hear that and I look online and I see kind of the crazy left. And then I look at like CNN and MSNBC and I'm like, oh, okay, maybe they are. But somehow, even in left-wing spaces, the conservatives have such a good reign on controlling the discourse. And I'm so upset that I allowed myself to be kind of brainwashed by the Trump derangement syndrome insult, where I'm like, okay, I got to be really fair. I got to be really careful when I cover Trump because I don't want to sound deranged. I don't want to sound unhinged. And, and I'm sitting here trying to think like, okay, well, when Trump said this absolutely crazy thing, when January 6th happens, like it was just this and that and that. And then meanwhile, the conservatives are like, so here's the 57th picture of Hunter Biden's we're showing in Congress. And we know, by the way, that him and Joe Biden, unilaterally dictated world policy to get rid of this prosecutor in Burisma. And it's like, oh my God. The uneven playing field, the assassination attempt, I think, completely broke me. When I saw how indignant conservatives are with like, you guys are calling us Nazis and look what happens. And then I'm like replaying in my mind all the Paul Pelosi comments. And I'm like, no, this is insane. I'm sorry. You guys completely bought the farm on this. This is crazy.
What do you attribute this skewing to? I mean, let's take the case of an intelligent person who is not allergic to Trump in the way that we are. I mean, I happen to know some of these people. I even have a few good friends who, I would consider, this is something I say to their face. I consider them low information voters. I mean, they're simply not disposed to pay attention to all of the thousands of norm violations and other indiscretions that Trump is trailing, right? So they have a little bit in their head. They have a lot of what I would consider misinformation from the right that more or less exonerates Trump on all counts. The phrase, the Russia collusion hoax, does an inordinate amount of work in their brains. And they've essentially just averted their eyes from the whole problem. And they come away with a feeling that more or less all of the kind of reaction that you and I have had to Trump is totally overblown. I mean, it is Trump derangement syndrome. It is just, we don't like the guy's personality and we couldn't get over that. But when you look at policies, he's super normal and not even especially conservative. And, much of his criticism of the powers that be and the way things were done in Washington for as long as anyone can remember, many of those criticisms are valid. There is a kind of deep state sclerosis that needs to be reamed out. They don't spend much time thinking about the actual ideologues in his orbit, people like Steve Bannon and what he might say on his dumb podcast. And they just see a very clear trade-off between Trump, who is calling bullshit on obvious bullshit, like wokeism, and the moral panic on the left that has racialized everything and made it seem like trans bathrooms is the greatest human rights concern of our time, etc. And they're truly allergic to all the stuff that's happened on the left, and so they're willing to support Trump, warts and all. How would you perform psychic surgery on this person?
So first, we have to be really clear. Are we talking about the audience, or are we talking about like the larger content creators? I call them content creators. You might call them pundits or commentators.
Yeah, I guess anything you would want to say to or about such a person so as to have an effect upon anyone in the audience like him or her.
I think there are several really large things at play. I think one of the larger, there are several large topics at play. One of the larger ones that is hard to talk about is, I had a viewer that emailed me with this idea, and I love this idea, and I stole it. He calls it magic boxes. That if you were to go back into the past and you were to hold an abacus, okay, it's very obvious what the function of an abacus is, and you can't hide any conspiracies inside of it. There are no secret cameras. There is no government listening device. Nobody's stealing your. It's just you just see what it is and you operate it, as you do. Nowadays with a phone, you don't really know everything that's going on inside of the phone. So if somebody were to say something like, "I think my phone is always recording me," well, to even begin to have that conversation, it's like, okay, well, do we understand how telemetry works, how data is sent, what kind of connection is needed, what kind of permissions are needed, like the difference between like the operating system versus an application. Like there's so much you have to go through that in life today, we basically operate so many of these magical boxes where are on the operating level, on the user level, things are so abstracted away from what's actually happening that it's allowed people to insert so much craziness that can't be easily fact-checked by anything. And I find that this is especially true when you look at my obsession lately has been, I'm trying to compile like a convincing argument relating to the January 6th stuff. So this is where my brain is kind of existing. But you might look at something like Donald Trump making a phone call to not to Raffensperger, but below him, an election fraud investigator in Georgia. If you have the prerequisite background to understand civics and the role of the president in a campaign and the role of a state election investigator, all of that, just that phone call in and of itself is so unfathomably inappropriate. It is such a horrible call. But in order to even begin to understand why, you have to explain so much. And I'll be honest, even I didn't really understand. Like when you say that, like, well, there's electors and, the people don't elect the president, the electors, I didn't even really know what that meant until like 2 years ago. And most people just, I know this because polling data, most people don't even know 3 branches of government, right? So how can you even begin to explain, the type of egregious norm violations that are happening when people don't know the norms, the systems that have the norm, people just don't have the understanding to even be able to grapple with, why would it be bad for this guy to make a phone call? But that people immediately understand, like cutting children's penises off to make them trans or whatever other crazy, like far left conspiracy stuff the conservatives like to obsess over. Like that's immediately understandable. So yeah, that's one huge thing that you have to get over is you just need like a decent foundation of knowledge to even understand why some of the things are norm breaking. Yeah.
Let's focus on January 6th. What would you say to someone who thinks that January 6th was basically a non-event? I mean, it certainly wasn't an insurrection. It was